Hello there, YouTube. Happy New Year. Well, technically it's past New Year, but close enough. Hope this year is a lot better for everyone than 2020 was. But let's be real, probably won't be. But hopefully it will be. Today, I was going to show off something I picked up recently. A board game called Mice and Mystics. And I'm opening it up right now. Mice and Mystics. This is a game that is, well, I guess you could say it's a children's game, really, but it's not exactly a children's game. It is a game set in a world of anthropomorphic characters, as you can see. And it's basically about them having a problem in their kingdom, and they need to go group up together and go, basically stop the big evil. Now, I'm not trying to get into specifics here because, unlike most other board games, this one is very much a story-driven game. And to the point that it's really like reading like a fairy tale type of book. And in that case, you don't want to read ahead or you don't want any spoilers at all for the most part about it. This here is the story book. Now, every expansion of this game, which there is 2, as well as the base game, is each considered their own book. And in that, you have a set number of characters, all of them are mice, for at least the start of the original game. All the characters are mice going through a kingdom trying to fix a wrong in their kingdom, more or less. That's as simple as it gets. Now, this is part of the game board. Here, I'm just pulling out parts, bits and pieces of it. It puts together much like a puzzle, oddly enough. Let's see if I can attach this together real quickly, just to give you an idea. Now, there's many different tiles in this game. There we go. There's many different tiles, many different scenarios, many different chapters, more or less. And as you read this, you actually do not want to read ahead other than just the base rules, because even in the game itself, as you're playing, going through the board, you essentially will come across certain things that happen, and the person who's playing that character will have to stop and read a passage out of the book. For example, let's say Marcus the noble knight, let's just say that, he crosses a river. And in the book, for the objectives of that particular mission, it will tell you when Marcus crosses the river, he needs to say these 3 lines here. Now, for people who don't like a lot of story in their games, and just want pure gameplay, they may not like this as much. But for people who really love some of the storytelling that goes on, world building in their game, and just general cooperative play, this is a really good game. It takes a while to get used to the rules because the rules are kind of odd. Let's be honest. It takes a while for every board game for you to get used to it. But if you're willing to put the time in, it's a really fun game. And it's a really good children's game as well as a good adult's game because the story is engaging. It's one of the very few games that I've seen as far as board games that you do want to see what happens next in the story. And the best way I can explain it is that this particular board game is a lot like the book series The Redwall. If you've played or this kind of game before, you'll like it. If you have read that kind of story before and you liked it, you will probably like this. That's the easiest way to explain it, really. Let's see here. I have to be careful with that. I'll press this off later. These are basically the tokens for the different characters. This is like the enemy encounters and the different status effects like charmed, stunned, let's see here, webbed. All of this will make sense when you're playing it. The end, which is basically the exit in most board games. As well as you've got different heart tokens. Let's see here. Yeah, some of the creature monster tokens Here, I'll let you take a second to glance at it. And you have, let's see here, little figures for all your different characters. I quite like this game because it plays a lot like an RPG in a sense. Like I said, these will be a little bit difficult to play, but this is just to give you an example of the types of monsters. Types of monsters you'll encounter. It goes everything from what looks like lice, basically, to rattling type people that you would see in a kind of well, not Warcraft, and a what is that board game's name? I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, spiders. These are all creatures you would essentially see in the forest, and they have become alive in this game to be actual enemies of yours. Here's some of the cards. Okay. These are mostly equipment. Oh, and these are enemy cards. Now, the thing about this game is that if you end up liking the base board game, you'll essentially want to eventually get the expansion packs if you really enjoyed it, because essentially the way this worked is they made Mice and Mystics, and it was its own story, fully told, but then they came out with this expansion, the Heart of Glorm, which is a much smaller expansion, I'll admit, but if you notice, it's made like a book. And the reason for that is because it's its own story that tells what happened after everything went on in the original Mice and Mystics game. Essentially, it's a continuation of what went on. And then they came out with a final expansion, which is much bigger, called Downwood Tales. Now, Downwood Tales I do not have yet because, well, to be honest, it's a bit too expensive at the moment. For what I've seen it for, it's about $110 to $120 usually. It could be higher than that. But I got the original base game here for $50, and I believe I got Heart of Glorm for like $25. So for me, it was just not worth it to get one single expansion that costs more than the original game, which is the real thing you need more than anything. So I'm just waiting to find a deal on that. That's the only reason. And probably I'll make a video if I ever do eventually get a hold of it. Now, here is some of the characters that you can see. I don't want to spoil too much, so I'm just going to show you like a couple of them. Like here's Colin. This would be basically one of the main starter characters, if I were to say. He's essentially your traditional warrior class. He's the big, strong leader who keeps everybody together during a crisis. And here's Filch. And you could probably get a good example of what he is if you've ever played any kind of thief in any kind of story. Especially if it's a Dungeons and Dragons story. He's a thief, rat, and a mouse, technically. He's a mouse. The enemies are rats. And you can probably guess just what kind of character he is and all he cares about. Let's see. The encounter cards, these essentially tell you how creatures act in the battles. And then, lastly, is the dice. Now, the dice in this game work pretty similarly to most other simpler board games, which is good since, like I said, this is an easy game to play with children. Especially if it's children who are not really heavily into board games, but they do like a good story being told to them. And here is a few, let's see here, of the dice. On one side you've got swords, and then on another side you've got bows. Yeah, here we go. Then of course you've got shields. And you've got cheese counters. These cheese counters are essentially used up over the course of the game to let you do special abilities as you go through it. Each character, if you look at the cards, has a set number of attributes, as well as a certain number of health. And you can use cheese in order to basically be kind of like a fate ability. Essentially, they can fix something that you've really screwed up badly and you're about to get destroyed completely. It's basically a way to help younger people, in my opinion. But, you know, it helps for adults too whenever they get screwed. Alright, now I'm going to open up the expansion here. Well, first I want to put up all this other stuff. Just give me a moment here. Put this back over in its own little corner here so that I know it's not part of the expansion. There we go. I'm going to open up the Heart of Lorm expansion. Now, like I said, I got this for around $20, $25, roughly, somewhere around that. This does not have nearly as much in it as the original because, for the most part, it's set all in the same general area because it takes place right where the last left off. And it is considered essentially Book 2. They say that Book 3, which is Downwood Tales, dramatically adds quite a bit. Whereas this one is simply just adding more deep, more like backstory, I guess you could say, as well as what your final encounters ended up affecting in the original game. Here we have the book for it. Well, one of the little counters popped out. Here's the cardboard, which has various cheeses. Here it says. I'll have to get that back in there eventually. Anyway. Here you can see cheese and new effects. Whoop. Popping them out, just holding it. Some of the new effects that happen, such as On Fire here, Lotus Nectar. This is all newer things that affect you in this particular expansion as part of this story. And here you'll notice there's not nearly as many new little characters and figurines as the original. But, like I said, this is mostly just an epilogue, essentially, to the original story. People wanted a little bit more into it. There is a character. And I should mention that on the back of these, it tells a story about each character. I was trying to avoid, for the most part, showing you that, just so... I don't want to spoil everything about this, because it really is a good game for people that are interested in story-based board games. And... to be honest, it's kind of rare to find a board game that is really heavily invested in its own story. This is, of course, the enemy cards. Big E, so you can see it. And that's pretty much it for this one. So, who is this for? This is for people who would like to play a board game with their kids, but they are afraid that it would be too much for them to play some other games, such as Dungeons & Dragons being a little too extensive for them to learn yet, or if they want to play a board game that's more complicated than the traditional Monopoly and, you know, those kinds of games. Connect 4... basically the generic stuff everyone plays. They want to try to get them more into the actual board game hobby, but they also know that if they put them straight into a war game, they're going to be lost. They're going to have no idea what's going on. They're going to see a mile-long list of rules and go, nope, I'm good. I'm done. And with this sort of game, you can play with them, you can have your own characters. It's easily soloable if you just want to pick 2 or 3 characters that you like, and just play them all as like a party, sort of like a Final Fantasy game. And this really does have a good story going once it finally starts to get going. It takes a little bit to get you into it, but that's just like any story. But it does set up a great world building for this type of game, and it's not very often. Now, the downside is this game is out of print. which means that they're no longer making more of them. But it is still easily acquirable on the market. You can easily get it on Amazon. You can easily get it on eBay. But it will eventually become very difficult to find. And in my opinion, in another 5 or 10 years, this game will probably be worth quite a bit, just because they did not make very many of them to begin with. And it is a really nice board game, a really simple board game that you can go back to. You can go back to it, your kids can go back to it, your kids' kids can eventually come to it, if they really want to. It's just a matter of being something that you would like to play because you like a good story. Well, that's pretty much all I've got to say right now. If I ever get the last expansion for it, I will make a new video, just a real quick video, showing you how big it is and how much of a difference it is in size compared to this one. These are what they call small blocks, which is they don't add a whole lot to the gameplay. They just add a few things that basically up the variety, up the replayability of the game, and usually add some new things like new characters. Well, thanks for watching.